Nome is on the complete western side. There's a little peninsula on the west by the Bering Sea, and we are right on that. We're about maybe 100 miles away from Russia. And when the Bering Sea freezes over like it currently is, some of the time, we've had some weird weather, then you're actually able to walk across the Bering Sea over to Russia.
Hello, and welcome to episode 54 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of March 24th, 2025. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including another follow-up to the U.S. Marine Band concert cancellation story, a COVID memory that you can actually bear to listen to, a story that, in a way, is about moose and squirrel, and a conversation with my first returning guest. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. This episode is all over the place. A new news item, a follow-up to an old news item, a COVID memory, an internet origin story, and at the center of it all, stories of what I would consider a genuine adventure. So, tune your drums and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Washington, D.C. Credit to the reporting of CBS, specifically its 60 Minutes news magazine program, and to the work of the website symphony.org, which is the publication of the League of American Orchestras. This story, thanks to a recent second strain commentary and then last week's trio section interview with composer Kevin Cherency, will be familiar to regular BandWagon listeners, so I'll offer the briefest of reminders and then get to the follow-up news item. Last year, the United States Marine Band judged a contest for teenage musicians, with the winners to be performing with the band in a concert scheduled for the 4th of May. The intended concert was canceled last month following a Trump administration executive order against diversity programs. The musicians of the Chicago-based Equity Arc organization were Black, Hispanic, Indian, and Asian. 60 Minutes got wind of the situation and decided to produce a segment about it at about the same time as the Equity Arc organization was reaching out to military band veterans, former band members of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, West Point, the Naval Academy, and the Marines. And those retirees answered the call. They created a substitute wind ensemble. The students gathered in Washington, D.C. for rehearsals and the performance. The 60 Minutes production team covered costs of plane tickets and travel, which is common practice, by the way, to bring student musicians to one place in order to interview them. The Equity Arc organization booked rehearsal space and a concert hall, and this past Sunday, the 16th, at the Music Center at Strathmore in North Bethesda, Maryland, 22 of the students who had lost their chance to play with the President's Own instead got to play a full 40-minute concert alongside all those military band veterans who had themselves traveled to D.C. on their own dime. The very first student interview quote from the 60 Minutes segment was the one that caught my attention as it cuts to the chase regarding why all this is important. Equity Arc musician Rishab Jain said, quote, "If we're a society that's suppressing art, we're a society that is afraid of what it might reveal about itself. If we're suppressing music, we're suppressing emotions, we're suppressing expression, we're suppressing vulnerability, we're suppressing the very essence of what makes us human. We are devaluing our own humanity. We're degrading our own humanity." That segment was broadcast nationally as part of 60 Minutes' March 16th edition, and 60 Minutes has posted online a video recording of the entire concert on its YouTube channel. The link to that concert is in our show notes, where all the best links reside. Dateline, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On Friday, March 21st, the Temple University Wind Symphony performed the world premiere of a new concerto by composer Emma O'Halloran. Temple was one of 15 institutions that commissioned the new concerto. Temple saxophone instructor and artist-in-residence Matthew Levy was the concerto's featured saxophone soloist and coordinated the commissioning. The piece was performed as part of the Wind Symphony's program, which was called Old, New, and Timeless. Levy said, quote, "It's like bringing a baby into the world. We're responsible for setting a framework for every performance that might follow." O'Halloran was a doctoral student at Princeton University and composed a piece for Levy's Prism saxophone quartet, which has since become a staple of saxophone repertoire. Patricia Cornett, director of bands at Temple and conductor of the Wind Symphony, said of O'Halloran, quote, "Because of her relationship with Matt and Prism, she's been able to write a piece that really plays into Matt's strengths as a player and things that Matt can do. There's a lot of improvisation in this piece, which not every classical saxophonist is going to necessarily be comfortable with, but because it's Matt, and he's a genius, it's working really well." The concerto, entitled Only Moments to Live, is about using mindfulness as a tool for managing life's ups and downs. O'Halloran said, quote, "Over the past few years, it's become increasingly important to me to slow down and cultivate presence in this fast-paced world. By integrating mindfulness practices into my daily life, I'm learning how to manage pain and anxiety and to be fully present to good moments as well as the bad, and my life feels richer for it." And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick water break and meet you on the other side. Hope you'll stay with me. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, a bit of show and tell here in March of 2025. I know a lot of us are working hard to suppress memories of 5 years ago, when the COVID-19 pandemic locked us all down for many months beginning in March of 2020, and has since fundamentally changed the way we approach a lot of activities, band no less than any other. And I'm always careful to avoid saying things like, well, the benefits I got out of the COVID time are... because I'm well aware that many people lost family and friends to the virus or otherwise had their lives turned upside down in various ways, health-wise and otherwise. But here's the story of how I got involved in a musical project that wasn't quite like any I've ever done. The fantastic Sue Barry, who used to be Sue Brady, is, among other things, the band director at Waterville, Maine High School. Thanks to COVID-19, the 2020-2021 school year there was pretty much like it was in most other places, devoid of the usual. Instead, curious and unwieldy combinations of remote and in-person learning, and you know what that meant for ensemble music. Instead, canceled events that would have taken place involving large groups of people, or close quarters, or travel, or any combination of the three. For the Waterville High School Band, Chorus, and Orchestra, the 2020-2021 school year was devoid of the usual spring festival trip, the sort of trip where the ensembles would have played for clinicians one morning and then spent the rest of the long weekend in New York City or Virginia Beach or wherever. Their directors decided to create a special experience to stand in place of a spring tour. Each ensemble would perform a piece at Waterville High School's probably virtual spring concert, which had been written specifically for them. And that's when I got a phone call. Sue had arranged for the band piece's compositional process to be a collaboration between composer and performers. We held a couple of teleconferences during which we all discussed what the piece could be about, what form it could take, all those obvious questions. The band members filled out follow-up surveys responding to questions that served to both clarify and expand on their thoughts. From late January 2021 through early March, my job was to write a piece that reflected these conversations. Spoilers, I nailed the deadline. The band did a huge amount of work to rehearse and record, and it wasn't just everybody record your part at home. Some of the band met in person, others attended class virtually from home, and half the band met on one day, half the other. And let's just say the schedulers didn't exactly work to put all the trombones in the same half. Does your brain hurt yet thinking about all this? And the project was all completed in time for the concert just before Memorial Day weekend. That by itself would be enough of a story, but it's worth getting into the details of the process and the end result. Sue wrote an article for the Maine Music Educators Association magazine about it, entitled Voice and Choice in 2021, Student Ownership in a Commissioned Work. In that article, she wrote, quote, "In an effort to give students ownership of this process, I solicited their input. At the very end of quarter 2, in early January, there was much unrest in our country. Though I am a teacher of music, it is more important to me that I am a teacher of life. To that end, on January 7th, 2021, during Period 1 band class, I had my students reflect on the events of January 6th. Through this process, it became clear that students needed an opportunity to share thoughts and emotions that they were experiencing due to the pandemic and the discourse in our country surrounding the election and the Black Lives Matter movement. In order to get the students thinking about what qualities a piece should contain, Sue wrote, I asked probing questions to spur their thought process. What music do you turn to for inspiration? What story would you like this piece to tell? Students were also asked about what sections of our ensemble should be featured. The student responses were thoughtful and insightful. Students shared the losses of the year and what sounds evoked meaning for them. Sirens, the sound of emails arriving in their inbox, silence as they experienced lockdown, the highs and lows. As their teacher, it was heartwarming for me to recognize that literally every section of the band was recognized as strong and competent by another section of the band. Responses from students were compiled, and we met with Rob via Zoom, and he took some of the students' thoughts and employed musical devices to create motifs and phrases that he shared with us all. Oh, and also, Sue's band students asked, could this be a jazz or blues-oriented composition? Piece of cake, yeah? Well, a little easier if you're a fan of the African-American spiritual genre, which luckily we all seemed to be. The composition ended up being based upon 2 existing melodies and several other melodic motifs. Those melodies included, first, the African-American spiritual tune Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, inspired partly by band members' interest in that jazz or blues sound, and partly because not only were spirituals created in the context of great struggle and as laments or songs of hope for African slaves in North America, but often as a means of guiding slaves to safety. And the second existing melody was that of the official state song of Maine, written by Roger Vinton Snow in 1931. And no, it's not the Stein song. The short melodic motifs I also utilized were generated by a curious process, converting the alphabet letters A through Z into the numbers 1 through 26, then further converting those numbers into the corresponding diatonic or chromatic pitches. In this way, motifs were generated which represented the letters and numbers in relevant terms such as the date 3/13/20, which was the date of school lockdown, COVID, SARS-CoV-2, BLM, steal, as in stop the, and vaccine. Here's where you're going to have to put on your music theory hat. A delayed return variant on sonata rondo form, which means first an A theme, a B theme, and a codetta for exposition, then an A theme and a C theme development, and finishing with a B theme and A theme recapitulation with a little codetta. You got all that? There's going to be a quiz. That turned out to be the compositional structure best suited to moving back and forth between Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen and the other motivic ideas. In addition, on the printed score, instead of generic musical stage directions such as allegro, espressivo, and the like, I utilized short phrases drawn from The Hill We Climb, which was the poem written for and recited at the 2021 presidential inauguration by Amanda Gorman. While these phrases didn't figure in the oral performance, Sue felt they were useful in shaping the band's musical interpretation. In a moment, I'll let you hear a brief excerpt from the beginning of the piece. It's computerized, but I think it gets the job done. And I'll also include a link to a Dropbox folder that will contain the final product that the Waterville Band and its media team assembled. So if you like, you can listen to the whole thing and see what you think. You can be the judge of whether we achieved the goal. As much as I was pretty happy with how most of the musical elements worked out, and very often they fell into place, as if there was more than just human cleverness at work, I'm at least as pleased that, to hear them tell it, the Waterville High School band members felt that it was everything they had asked for, that it represented what they had felt and said what they wanted it to say. After all, the piece was really theirs. So here's the start of the piece, which, oh yeah, I almost forgot. It's called 2021, the word 20 and the number 21. After that, and a short break, I'll return with a previous guest doing a very different thing now. Okay, let's change keys and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, this conversation will mark a first for the BandWagon podcast. I'm joined by a gentleman to whom my listenership will already have been introduced, specifically back in early May of last year, 43 episodes ago. And when we last left you, the main thrust of the symposium was a bit of a musical archaeology project involving band music by the composer Robert Russell Bennett and its presentation by the Franklin and Marshall College Wind Ensemble. So this week, the same gentleman who was at the center of that story is at the center of another story that I suspect folks in the lower 48 will find of interest. Intrigued by that little phrase? Well, you ought to be, and I definitely was when I heard about this. So please help me welcome back to the program, Richard Sargent. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Rob. Good, very early morning.
And it's morning here, too, as we record, but I'm much closer to the afternoon than you are, and that's not unrelated to the first detail of your story that I must confess a certain ignorance about. And namely, I wasn't sure how many time zones apart we were, and I had to go find that out. Yet another lower 48 problem, I suppose. So ordinarily, I begin these chats with a series of introductory questions. What's your instrument? How'd you get started in band? What groups have you played with? We already did those, and today I'm going to cut straight to the last of my first questions, and that is, what's your current band-related role?
So my current role is I am the band director and music teacher at Nome Belt Middle High School in Nome, Alaska.
Nome.
And I teach grades 6 through 12.
Now, in all likelihood, the majority of my listenership is going to be in the same boat that I am, which is that of a certain amount of benign ignorance about what the state of Alaska is really like. And I'm going to go the humble route and predict that there are things that I don't know, which I don't even know that I don't know, both about the part of the world you're in and the state of the band activity there. And I can try to make educated guesses, but even there, I kind of hesitate to, because it's much more likely that I'll come off sounding like somebody who's been plugged full of stereotypes and misconceptions. So I think the wisest first thing to do is just to step aside and let you tell the story, which would begin with the obvious question. How in the world did you get connected with a gig in Alaska?
What ended up happening was I just decided on a whim to apply for a band director job in Alaska just to see what it was like, if they even had band or anything. Just needed a change of pace in my life. I applied for a school in one of the bigger cities. I don't remember if it was Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau, and thought that's probably the only place where band even exists. And then in June, I get a phone call from my current principal and assistant principal asking, hey, do you want to come up to Nome? And I'm like, I've never even heard of Nome. How'd you get my information? And I guess when you apply for one teaching job in Alaska, you apply to every teaching job in Alaska. So once I took the opportunity to listen to what they had to say and sell their points on Nome, I did my own personal research to see what the town was like, what it was known for, and just to see if I was making the right decisions for myself. And everything pointed to this is going to be a good little place for me. And that's, I stand by that case in fact right now.
You mentioned a number of the cities in Alaska. I did know that the capital city it was Juneau, and it's further south than most of Alaska, in a little strip of territory that reaches down about to the latitude of the southern shore of Hudson Bay. And I had to look that up, but it's still a ways away from the Canada-U.S. border. And on a map, the whole state looks like a giant upturned saucepan, with the vast majority of the land being way to the north, further north even than Yukon Territory. So whereabouts in Alaska is Nome?
So Nome is on the complete western side. There's a little peninsula on the west by the Bering Sea, and we are right on that. We're about maybe 100 miles away from Russia. And when the Bering Sea freezes over like it currently is, some of the time, we've had some weird weather, then you're actually able to walk across the Bering Sea over to Russia. And we also have a little inside joke between a guidance counselor and myself saying that I'm the best band director on the west side of Hawaii, because Nome is further west than Hawaii if you really like take a look at the latitude and longitudinal structures.
I got to run to my globe and get a look at that. I hadn't thought of that.
It's pretty wild when you think about how big Alaska is.
So you're teaching grades 6 through 12. What sorts of musical things are you teaching within grades 6 through 12? Not elementary then?
No, not elementary, though the program had a history of being a K through 12 position that ended up slowly turning into a 6 through 12 position. So at the high school level, I teach high school band 9 through 12 in one class, and high school chorus 9 through 12 in one class, and then high school percussion class, where right now we're pretty much learning three things. We're learning just basic how to read music, a little bit of mallet technique, and I decided to start this the week after spring break as a way for the kids to really lean into something, but just teach fundamentals of drum and trap set. They've been really getting into that. And at the middle school level, I have an 8th grade band, and then a 7th grade band, and then 6th grade started as a general music / recorder class, because that was the 6th graders' first ever scholastic music class. Because they had lost that at the elementary school.
Oh, wow.
And the 6th grade class was the first to never have music. And now they have, everybody has their band instruments.
So now, knowing that Nome is not one of the big cities, I wonder, what are the economic circumstances that your students come from? And maybe that's a complicated answer.
So Nome is a little bit of a hybrid. Around us, we're surrounded by smaller villages that can be anywhere between 80 to maybe 300 people. And we have like the metropolitan hub for transports. So everything will come to Nome before being dispersed to the smaller villages in our area. So we have about 3,000 to 4,000 people in our community, and it's a fairly diverse mix of native Alaskan and non-native Alaskan. So Nome originally started as a gold rush town. And during that time, we hosted about 20,000 residents. So it's a large scale area for where we are. But over time, with terrible weather and everything, people just migrated outward. But Nome is still known for its gold mining prospects.
So in Nome, being as far north as it is, so therefore remote and prone to tough weather and tough climate, is there a lack of daylight component to living there that just compounds that difficulty? And as someone who came there from New England and is originally a Florida native, how did you find that? Was that a thing for you?
So for me, I'm a little bit of a hermit. So when it came to the all-night cycle, it wasn't too bad for me. We're lucky that we have teacher housing that is connected via underground tunnel. So it's like I never had to step outside unless I needed to go to the store or anything. But the one thing that really caught me off guard was when I first moved up there, and it was 24 hours of daylight.
Oh.
Yeah, and I just remember if my curtains weren't down and I went to go to bed at 9 o'clock, I wasn't going to bed that night. Because it was bright. And that's something you can't get away from. I can deal with the all-night thing better than I can the all-day thing. And with the kids, when it's really bright outside like it is now we're getting close to 12 hours of daylight, they just want to be outside. And you can tell the kids are kidding. Yesterday was just probably the silliest day for my 8th graders. We had a good time, but you can tell that they're just itching to be outside and to enjoy life in the sun.
On the one hand, that applies to most children as spring approaches, but I can only imagine what it's like in your world.
I was not ready for that.
Were there other challenges that we in the lower 48 could not imagine, and maybe that you had not anticipated that you ran into?
The biggest challenge I feel that's not school related is the lack of availability of things. We're lucky in Nome that we have 2 grocery stores
Hmm.
where some of the local villages may just have a convenience store. But we have 2 fully stocked grocery stores. There's not much else, and we have to have a lot of personal things delivered. However, it takes a long time for things to be shipped out here.
Hmm.
Even though Amazon says, oh, 2-day shipping, you're looking at 2-week shipping even with Amazon Prime.
Huh.
So you got to know what you want, when you want it, and it well in advance to know when you need it. And with the postal system, you know how it's already crazy getting things in the
Yeah.
lower 48.
Yeah.
There have been times where I'm having conversations like, hey, did you get that card? No. And then after the conversation, weeks later, oh, hey, I got your card.
It also occurs to me, I have a longtime friend who at one time way back was teaching school in Hawaii, and he was talking about how the prices there were always on the exorbitant side just because everything had to be shipped there, especially. Is it safe to assume it's the same there?
Yeah, it's pretty expensive, at least in Nome. I've seen prices in Anchorage, and they're pretty comparable to the lower 48. Our gas prices, they're set at the very beginning of the summertime, and they stay the same all year long. But one gas station in town is $6.28 a gallon,
Huh.
and another is $6.29 a gallon.
Processing that.
But when you only have 5 square miles of where you can drive in town, you're not really driving too much.
Well, that brings up a topic that I was thinking of before, having also heard stories about Alaskan high school sports teams needing to fly wherever they needed to be for a road game. A road game, listen to me. But I'm assuming that the transportation limitations and the sheer distance involved, what kind of effect does that have on an all-state or honor ensemble kind of a project?
With most anything that requires an audition, we're lucky that we have a really good infrastructure with recording processes.
Hmm.
Just because if you're auditioning a student, it doesn't make sense to drive them out to Anchorage, where the hub of life is in Alaska,
Okay.
because that'd just be a lot of money.
Hmm.
And we're lucky that we do have a really good all-state music festival, honor bands, orchestra, and chorus that I was able to attend this year, meet new colleagues, learn the lay of the land, where I also learned that there are a couple marching bands in Alaska, believe it or not,
Huh.
which was surprising to me. But in terms of districts, we're broken up into a few different regions under the Alaska Schools Activities Association, or ASA. What we're doing is Nome is hosting our regional scholastic music festival. We're hosting 4 other schools. The students do the drum corps thing where they sleep in the school, and then during the day, we'll do our solo and ensemble evaluations first thing in the morning, just because school's in session and we just don't have a lot of other space to have multiple rehearsals going on. And then after solo and ensemble, we have our mass band and mass chorus rehearsals, and then we have concerts on Friday nights for each of the different schools to showcase what they have been working on with
Hmm.
their band, chorus, or guitar students. And then on Saturday, the students that have qualified for state solo and ensemble, they do what they call a command performance. And then we do our full mass band and mass chorus concert. And that would conclude everything. I hear that some districts do a music performance assessment for that showcase, but in our region, where not every band can bring or chorus can bring every single student just due to funds,
Hmm.
we just decide to do just an exhibition, because that's not really fair.
Yeah.
Because if I have my whole band and then they only have half to 3/4 of their band, how do you program for that circumstance? And when you take things away, you just don't know what you're going to get.
Interesting. With you being relatively removed from, again, we'll go to the lower 48 phrase, can you get honor band conductors to come up?
Yes, I had reached out to some people that I knew, and there certainly is interest. People just want to come out here and see what it's like.
Yeah.
I originally wanted to reach out to my high school assistant band director, Jeremy Langford, but unfortunately, the week that we had to host this, he just wasn't available. So I went with one of my best friends from undergraduate, Brandon Lasando, who is the president-elect of the Kansas Bandmasters Association. And he's coming out with his choral counterpart, Taryn Gervais, and they're tag teaming the teaching. And then we're also outsourcing piano accompaniment by a gentleman named Andrew Metz out of Massachusetts. So people do want to come out and just see Alaska and understand just what it's like.
So a person comes to Nome. In your case, again, you came from as far away in the U.S. as can be done, not just in terms of distance and climate, but in terms of access to things, as you say, and population density and sheer activity, I guess. When you got to Nome, this is an awful way to put it, but did you feel kind of alone or isolated?
Not really. People come to Nome from all different places. My school district hooked up new teachers with community mentors as a way to integrate ourselves with the local community, which is a really good thing when you're 3 miles out of town and you don't know anybody. And my community mentor that I was partnered with, her name is Nicole. She is from Winchendon, Massachusetts, which really makes it a small world.
Wow.
We were able to talk about our experiences in Western Massachusetts. And then she got me involved with the Rotary Club here in Nome, which really allowed me to lean into the town and do a lot of volunteering, especially over my spring break where it was the Iditarod season.
Oh, it is that part of the world. It's that specific part of the world, kind of thing.
Nome is the finish line for the Iditarod. Kind of a big deal here. Not a big enough deal for me to wake up at 3 a.m. to greet the mushers. Maybe one day.
But it's almost as if the folks in Nome know that sort of mentor program is going to be useful and needed and actually get proactive about it, which is good to hear, I think. So, I don't know, maybe it isn't fair to ask this question of somebody still not out of their first year in a job, but do you have thoughts about how long you want to hang in there?
I have a lot of thoughts about it. One of the difficulties that Nome presents is, like I said before, the lack of resources. And for a lot of people, that can be a complete turnoff to anything. There are times when we lose teachers mid-year or even before the school year starts. They step one foot off the plane and they see what's being stacked against them, and they get right back on the plane and go back home. And for me, I think it's really important to be a beacon of consistency and be resilient in the face of not having everything that I want, but having most of what I need to be able to have a successful experience for my students. I've signed my contract for next year, and I signed it the very first day I got it. So
Really?
there wasn't a question in my mind whether or not I was coming back, unless I just didn't get a contract. As long as I'm getting contracts, I see myself staying here for the goal is at least 5 years, but maybe even longer than that if it turns out to be the best case scenario, as it's been showing me that it has been.
Has your school system experienced that kind of commitment before?
Yes. One of the former music teachers, his name was Ron Horner. He taught in Nome for 16 years. And then he retired. And then after that retirement, over the last 4, 5, 6 years, maybe, There's just been a lack of consistency, people coming and going, times of long-term substitutes just to keep the program afloat. I have to give it to my high school kids that started with Ron and that are still a part of it. Their chains have been yanked over the past how many years?
Yeah.
And they are still doing it, and they come to class every day. This semester has been nothing but growth in that high school band class, and I'm really proud of the work that they've done, given everything that they've been through.
I'm imagining that living there, they are kind of used to the basic conditions and whatnot, but the specific situation of having that kind of turnover and, as you say, inconsistency in a music program, I mean, that'll take anybody out.
Yeah.
So how many folks have you got in your ensembles and your classes within the context of how big is the school even?
I should know the number, how big the school is, but I don't. I'm just in my little vacuum bubble of what I work with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Let's see, high school band I have 12, chorus I have 5, percussion I have 5, and then this is where the numbers start to get there right now. 8th grade I have another 12, 7th grade I have 24, and 6th grade I have 19. Is everybody going to continue to play an instrument? Maybe not. But it's a good place to start. And those that want to continue, I know, will be some of the greatest students I've ever get the opportunity to work with. If that's what working with my high school students say about the community and their love of music.
Is there any possibility of private lessons in that community, or are we dealing with not for the reasons of resources available, people available, money available?
We have quite a musical community here in Nome. There's a few piano instructors, one of which who is full to capacity with probably a 2-year waiting list of people that want to take lessons with her. She's wonderful. You have musicians at all the churches. One of my guidance counselors plays the drum set. The elementary school principal was a former music teacher.
Nice.
That plays piano at his Lutheran church. So there's a lot of opportunity everywhere. I just haven't really been able to dig too deep into that quite yet. But for me personally, I'm not a big fan of doing private lessons for students, because when you mix teaching with money, that may be considered a conflict of interest during the school year. And that's just something I want to just stay away from. But if a student comes to me after school asking for help, I will be glad to stay after school and give them the help that they request.
Hi, everyone. Narrator Rob here. Richard and I talked for a little while longer, and I was carefully dancing around the question of how are your students' musical lives impacted by poverty, or am I just assuming poverty because of their remote location? And Richard rescued me by going to the topic of just who his students are, not just in terms of who can afford what music lessons or whatever, but who they are. Demographically, yes, but as members of their native culture.
In Nome, we have a fairly diverse population, which is about 50% Native Alaskan, and the other 50% is fairly distributed white, Latino, African community, but with the majority being Native Alaskan. And what's really wonderful about that, from my perspective, is seeing my students take days off to be able to what they call subsistence traditions and learning the traditional native life. They'll go out berry picking when it's nice outside. They'll go fishing or crabbing, or first week of September, moose hunting. And I think it's a wonderful thing to see those lifestyles not go away in the face of technology and cell phones, and the kids really buying into the native Inupiaq culture that Nome has to offer.
I have a curious little question written down here, ready to use, and I wasn't sure where I was going to use it. Maybe this is the place. The way you've spoken of your students makes me think that they're the best answer to the question, but maybe there are more answers still. And that question is, in your time in Alaska, is there something you've learned that's unexpected and or kind of cool?
When I was interviewing for the position, one of the questions that I had was whether or not there was any type of community music making going on, whether it's community band or community musical theater or anything of that nature. And I was told enthusiastically, yes. And that was one of the reasons that compelled me to go, because there had used to be a really big musical theater culture here,
Huh.
with their former mayor, Richard Beneville, who had performed on Broadway and just made it his mission to share that, in addition to the community aspects of our basketball band, which was a great outlet for me personally. But with my love of musicals, after working with Amherst Community Theater, it's something that I'm slowly starting to not reinvent, but to help recycle and recirculate and get the interest up again through musical performance. Looking at doing a little musical review in the next year as a way of just gauging performers' interests, and seeing where their level is and how we can make a product the best that it can be with the limited resources that we have here in Nome.
That is not necessarily anything that I would have expected to hear, and I wonder if I'm insulting the community by saying that.
No, I know when I moved up here, I knew that if I had any expectation and comparison to what I knew from Western Massachusetts or Central Florida or anywhere that I've been in my 4 summers of drum corps as a performer, I would have been at a loss or felt disappointed. And because I did not come with any preconceived notions, it allowed me to fully embrace Nome for what it has to offer, which is a great community and wonderful people that are a part of it.
Hmm. Now, recognizing that in your world it is still, as we record, monstrously early, and you have been exceptionally generous to suggest, hey, let's get together for 10:30 a.m. Eastern Saturday, and I did that calculation and thought that is above and beyond. I mean, I'm a morning person, but only after I'm up, so I want to respect your time and maybe even your interest in going back to bed for a while. And I had also assumed, which is dangerous, that your answers to my usual intro and outro questions from our last conversation had not changed. Then I thought, supposing that's not so. I mean, time passes, new experiences clearly happen. So here's the first one. Have you got another favorite piece of band music that you've played or conducted?
One of the pieces that we are playing for our regional music performance, that my friend Brandon suggested, isn't something that I would have never heard of until he said, let's do it. And it's called Ritmos de la Tierra by Victoriano Valencia. It is authentic Latin music. I'm going to get on a little bit of a soapbox just for a one tiny second. Claire Grundman has his place, and all that scholastic music of the medleys and things have their places. They're great pieces, but they don't provide the authenticity of somebody that lives the culture. And Ritmos de la Terra is just some of the most beautiful music. We're only doing 2 movements of it, the Huiano and the Raspa. But out of the 10 movements, there is a beautiful number called Bambuco that I would just love to either play or conduct. And as we're listening to it in class one day, just in the background, one of my students was just like, this sounds like Mario music. And as I'm listening to it and I hear the similarities of harmonic progressions and stuff, I'm just like, he ain't wrong. Like it's very fun and uplifting, and it sounds like it could be a Coastal Mario tune. and then just to humor me on a personal level, just because we talked a little bit about musicals, I would love to music direct the musical Ghosts, which is based off the 80s Winona Ryder film.
Huh.
It is such a beautiful, beautiful musical, and the way how they show the relationship and tell the story in the musical way, it's just spot on and fantastic on all accounts.
Pointing in the other direction, is there a piece of music that you've never played but you would like to? Maybe something that you have heard recently and thought that'd be good? Or did we just do that?
I mean, we kind of just did that,
Yeah.
but also in the like, I'm also not elitist enough to avoid saying this as well. I really don't have the time in my day to really explore new musics, and it's okay because my priorities lie in giving these kids the best opportunity. And right now, even though the high school band is playing in conjunction with the eighth graders, so we have a fuller band experience, something like Rob Grice's Dragon Slayer or Lloyd Conley's Cathedral. Even though it might seem really easy, it's what my kids need right now to feel accomplished in what they do.
Yeah.
And build that sense of, this is how you band, and then take the opportunities that we learn from this and grow into the future.
So the next to last question that comes up is there an ensemble that you'd love to play with that you haven't?
No, not right now. I reminisce on groups that I have played with. Getting to conduct the Greenfield Military Band last year was such a fun opportunity. And if it wasn't for the support that they had given me through last summer, I probably wouldn't have found myself teaching. It was just the growth that I needed to even consider applying for whatever job I did apply initially out here in Alaska. And then I also really miss the little pit family that I had with Amherst Community Theater. Those are some of the most supportive musicians that I've ever gotten to work with. And then last year with Susical, that entire cast was just such a fun entity to work with.
Well, I'm pleased to be able to say that there are a nice number of people in the world whom I can call friends of the podcast. But again, you are the first of them to make a return state visit, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity to check in and see what new things are going on with you.
Yes, thank you very much for having me again and allowing me to share my stories and experiences here in rural Alaska, the last frontier.
Anytime you want to come back with news from the frontier, you are entirely welcome. Music teacher, band director, adventurer, Richard Sargent, thanks again for your time, and may good fortune continue to follow you, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Okay, after this short break, one more March Madness story. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is one more March Madness story, as promised, but it's not about basketball, so we're off to the Frozen Four and NCAA hockey postseason competition. For context, we can argue about who was the very first college band, but let's be honest, if we're talking about American wind band origins, we have to talk about the University of Michigan. My episode 20 guest, John Mange, may be able to speak to this point in greater detail now that he's a doctoral student there, but my looking in from the outside perspective has always been, wow, just incredible sounds coming from Ann Arbor. That Michigan marching band has a sound all its own. as does its public address announcer. And if you haven't ever, you owe it to yourself to go search on YouTube for the University of Michigan Symphonic Band. My heavens, a rabbit hole from which you may never emerge. They are stunning, powerful, tasteful, acrobatic, whether it's Michael Haithcock at the helm or the newly minted conductor Jason Fettig, or, well, you feel like whoever gets on the podium, they'll make them look good. And dignity, always utter dignity. Well, except for the occasional halftime moments, but halftime is not always for dignity after all. So the memory I have of them, the only time I have ever heard any Michigan wind band live and in person, has everything to do with being impressed, but not as much to do with dignity. But great to listen to and to see nonetheless. I was traveling with the Boston University Pep Band as it accompanied the men's hockey team to the Frozen Four in Cincinnati, Ohio, in spring of 1996. That trip has plenty of stories that I will avoid for now, including utilizing 6 minivans to get around instead of a bus, and walking the streets of Cincinnati as a full band looking for that restaurant whose location one of us was sure he knew, and it's a wonder we ever got back to Boston. That's how far we walked. In circles, I think. But this story begins and ends in the arena where one of the national semifinals was being played between BU and Michigan. And if you don't think that behind my set of quads, I was playing quads, I was hoping that the BU band might stack up decently next to the storied Michigan band, well, you ain't been listening since the end of the trio section. The game progressed, and we were doing all right, certainly from the standpoint of band energy and also from the perspective of band traditions. We always played certain songs at certain moments in a hockey game, and in my dual moment of playing notes right now and also listening to the band as a Michigan band fan might, I thought our repertoire was pretty entertaining and occasionally very funny and pointed. But then, somewhere in the middle of the second period, I think, came the Michigan band tradition that I only later found out was a Michigan band tradition. They played this frantic arrangement of the theme from the old cartoon series Rocky and Bullwinkle. And as they did, the Michigan hockey fans around them, and the Michigan percussionists too, I think, since they weren't playing the chart, they all placed their thumbs on their temples, extended their palms and fingers, and moved that whole head and hands shaped contraption back and forth, rocking their shoulders from side to side in time to the music. I have never been more jealous of a pep band shtick in my whole entire band life. It was the silliest thing in the world, except that, as usual, if enough people do a silly thing with perfect precision and utter commitment, it's not silly at all. It's damn impressive. It's band. Michigan won the game. But I got a life memory. So I guess we're even? Maybe not. Okay, one last pause to catch our breath, and I mean it, and then we'll wrap things up for this week. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. For the CODA this week, I don't know what it is with me and pithy quotes lately, but I got another one. This one is not aimed specifically at the band activity, but it definitely counts. It's from the Twitter account called Owl at the Library. Whoever this person is, they usually post little clever or amusing thoughts about books, reading, writing, that sort of thing. But occasionally, the posts run toward the philosophical, and a couple of years ago, almost to the day, this person wrote the following. The thing about being bullied for taking joy in a special interest is you're experiencing a level of delight and satisfaction the bullies can't even imagine. You've already won. Yep, can confirm. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to this week's news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, Richard Sargent, can be found in our show notes, as can a link to BandWagon's merch store, thanks to the good folks at TeePublic. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, please do share it in the direction of someone whom you think might not be a listener yet. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the pod every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton. Detail, fall out.